Friends, Romans, countrymen, good evening. Um, so this lecture tonight is the one on the sport the majority, well, at least the plurality of you chose, which was basketball. I had to do a little bit of research for this, but I'm glad I did because I either learned a few things I didn't know or reminded myself of things that I once knew, but I forgot for various reasons. So I'm pretty excited for this one. Before we even get into that, I don't know what your guys' outside interests are, but guys who have had me in class may know that one of mine is space. And you may have seen the news recently. NASA a couple months ago launched a brand new telescope called the Webb Telescope into outer space. It's way more powerful than the Hubble telescope. The idea is to see really far into the universe so we can see galaxies almost back to when the Big Bang happened. Because the basic idea is if you see a galaxy that's say 13 billion light years away, that means what you're seeing now is actually what took place 13 billion years ago because it took the light 13 billion years to reach you. Um, so the more powerful it is, the farther back in time you can look. It's kind of cool in that way. And they just released the first batch of images that it collected. Um, I just really encourage you guys to take a look at these. They're pretty incredible. They look fake, some of them, but we've never been able to see this far in the universe before. So, like for instance, it's just the New York Times article I was reading about them. Um, this is not fake. This is actually four galaxies reacting on each other here. Um, Again, not fake. This is really looking into outer space. We've never been able to see this far ever. This is the first one that was released. If you look closely at it enough, and you can look it up on your own time, you can actually see how the space time continuum actually bends. You know, if you look in here, you can kind of see the light bent coming towards the Earth. So it's kind of proving Einstein's relativity. And then, really, this is the picture that's incredible to me. This is apparently it's one of the earliest uh, periods of star formation we've ever been able to see. The 50,000 years might not sound like, or it might sound like a long time, but it's really nothing in the span of the universe, which is billions and billions and billions of years old, probably about 14 billion years old. So to be able to see this kind of cosmic dust collecting in the early stages of forming a star, that's pretty incredible, at least to me. So uh, thank you for allowing me to nerd out there for a second. But if you're interested in space or anything like that at all, highly recommend just Google James Webb Telescope images, and you'll be able to see a lot of that stuff and read about what NASA's doing. But for news here on Earth, um, just some housekeeping stuff first. This is going to be posted on Tuesday night, so by this Friday, um, we're going to have progress reports for this course. You guys are fine. None of you guys are messing up too much. You guys are all doing pretty much what I'm asking you to do, and you're doing it on time and you're doing it thoughtfully, and I really appreciate that. I hope you're getting something out of it so far. And if you're not, hopefully you will in the coming lectures and projects here. I will send out an email in the next couple days about your final paper topic. And then I'm gonna try to schedule some meetings for you guys just to talk one-on-one on Google Meet. 'Cause it's gonna be easier for us to talk through it that way rather than just sending emails back and forth. That might take a week or more just to do that. So we'll try to set up some kind of schedule for that. We'll worry about that in a couple days. Right now, let's talk about basketball. So I'm gonna share my screen as you're getting used to. Infinity mirror, go away. There we go. All right, let's talk about basketball. Um, I've briefly mentioned basketball before in our lectures. It's one of the first couple points I make on this slideshow is what I've said before, but I haven't really gone into a ton of depth on it because it is different than other sports in that, like I've said before, it's invented. You know, you can actually say basketball is invented. You can't really say baseball is invented. You can't say football is invented. I wouldn't say hockey's invented. Lacrosse is invented. But you can say basketball is invented, right? Before 1891, there's no basketball. After 1891, there is. Um, the inventor, you may have heard of him before. You may have seen these pictures I'm showing you here. Dr. James Naismith is in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1891. So Springfield, Massachusetts is actually where the Basketball Hall of Fame is. I've been to the Basketball Hall of Fame. It's a solid place. I would say the baseball one is better. I believe the pro football one's better, but it's not bad. The best thing about it is that they have a court you can actually play on. You can shoot around on, and they have various different baskets from all of history that you can shoot on. And one of the options you can shoot on at the Hall of Fame actually is a peach basket. It's really cool. You can just go shoot free throws on a peach basket. Um, Peach baskets were one of the first things of equipment used in basketball. So James Naismith, he is a doctor of physical education. Okay, remember in the late 1800s, people are really psyched about getting people, um, exercising and better physical shape. Well, people are also psyched about making things more scientific in the late 1800s. So they kind of put these two things together into a study of physical education, and that's how you can get a doctorate in physical education, like James Naismith. James Naismith goes to be a PE teacher essentially at a YMCA school. Okay, it's now known as Springfield College, but it was a YMCA basically training school at that point. Remember, YMCA stands for Young Men's Christian Association. It's very much muscular Christianity. We're going to teach you about Jesus, and we're going to get you in the gym lifting. We're going to get you playing games, right? We're going to get you gains. That's the whole idea behind the school. So don't think of Naismith as just a gym teacher or Mr. Nay or Coach Lancetta. Like nothing, not that there's anything wrong with what they do. They do something very important. But Naismith is kind of even above and beyond that. He's taking care of more than just one period a day. Like he's shaping everything those kids do there at the YMCA. And his superior, essentially, Dr. Luther Gulick, he's actually an interesting guy. If you look him up, he's kind of at the forefront of a lot of these kind of high school sports movement, high school or kids playgrounds. He was very much in favor of building playgrounds, very much in favor of high school sports. He's actually kind of interesting guy, but he's Naismith's superior at YMCA school in Springfield, and he's like, "Listen, James, it's really cold here in the winters. If you've ever been to Massachusetts, especially Western Massachusetts, it's pretty cold and snowy. So it's kind of hard to do a lot of physical activities outside. We want to keep these kids fit, but we don't have anywhere to do it. And we do have stuff. We are inside, but there's only so much we can do inside. We can maybe run some laps at the indoor track. That might be about it. So listen, James, come up with a sport where we can keep these guys moving, right? We don't want them to get stir crazy inside. If you just sit around doing nothing, that's when bad things happen. That's their idea, right? Come up with a game we can play inside. Don't have it be too rough, right? We don't want to be cracking kids' skulls inside playing football. So Naismith says, okay, I'll figure something out. And what he comes up with is basketball. Okay. He comes up with two goals, right? The idea is to throw the ball into one of those goals. It just so happens that a peach basket was the easiest thing for him to find at the beginning. So he used two peach baskets. And he went with it. Right, he has his original 13 rules of basketball, which I'm not going to go too in depth into. Basketball looks very different in 1891 than it does today. We'll get into a little bit of that coming up. But the sport is invented December of 1891. There you see him at the top with an early basketball, which if you look closely, actually looks more like a volleyball. Some basketballs also look almost like footballs at this time. If I forgot to put a picture of one on this slideshow. But they have laces on them. A lot of early basketballs have laces on them. But I believe he took a volleyball type ball because volleyball was actually invented a couple miles down the road from Springfield in Holyoke, Massachusetts. So there's a lot of volleyball is another sport you can say was invented. And there's a lot of sports invention going on in Western Massachusetts. But you see his volleyball type of ball, and then he has a peach basket here. And then here I like this one at the bottom because he has his wife with the ball, I guess, pulling up for a 2-foot jump shot. And he's holding the basket. I'm just imagining that his wife just crossed over some kid and is about to pull up here, but I just like that picture. So Naismith, after this, he gets a job at the University of Kansas, and he brings this sport west. Okay, there's a reason why University of Kansas has such great tradition, because their first coach is literally the guy who invented the game. University of Kansas, they have Fog Allen Fieldhouse, which is one of the most famous basketball arenas in the country. The guy that's named after Fog Allen is a famous coach at Kansas. Fog Allen's coach at Kansas was James Naismith. So the history really goes back far there. But it's pretty ironic that he's the only losing coach in Kansas history. The guy who invented basketball has a losing record as a basketball coach. I think that's hilarious. So poor James Naismith in that case. But really, it spreads pretty quickly. And there's a couple reasons for this we can imagine. First of all, you can play it indoors, anytime, any weather, right? It could be freezing cold outside. It could be blistering hot. Doesn't matter. You can play it indoors. You don't need a big space for it. Okay. If maybe growing up you've played in some old church gyms, or if you've ever been to, what's an example? Oh, Wildwood Catholic. If you've ever been to Wildwood Catholic's gym, it's basically like 2/3 the size of a real court, a real high school basketball court today. It's a small space, but you can still play basketball in there. If you go to a high school court in the city like Philadelphia, you go to Roman Catholic's court. It's like 2/3 the size of a regulation court, but you can still play there, right? So you can play in small spaces. You don't need a ton of people. You only need 5 guys in your team. Football, you need 11. Baseball, you need at least 9. Basketball, you only need 5, right? So don't discount that. It's easy to spread in popularity because you only need 5 guys. You might not always have a lot of guys to play the sport. So if you only have 5, you're good to go. So it's easy to be played in cities, right? There's not a lot of space in cities. We've talked about this before. That's why football is not a super popular game in cities. There's not a lot of space to put huge football fields. Even baseball diamonds take up a lot of space. Basketball, you can fit, a dozen basketball courts, or excuse me, half a dozen basketball courts where a football field would be, right? You can fit plenty of basketball courts into small space. And that's really partially, at least a big reason why basketball is able to spread so rapidly, right? All the other sports we've looked at so far have been outdoor. This is an indoor sport. Can still be played outdoors, but it's primarily an indoor sport. You can see how quickly it takes fire that 13 years after it's invented, it's added to the Olympics as a demonstration sport. Demonstration sport means you can't win a gold medal for it. It's not being fought for medals, but it's just showing, hey, here's a new sport out here. We want to show the world what it's like. Have at it. That's only the 3rd Summer Olympics in 1904. There had only been 2 before that. And the Olympics in 1904 are in St. Louis in America. So America thinks, hey, we invented this sport 13 years ago here. Let's show it off to the world. Also, fun fact, James Naismith was Canadian. James Naismith is not American. So basketball is invented in America, but by a Canadian. Basketball is officially added to the Olympic roster in 1936, and it's been there to this day. Actually, there's 3-on-3 basketball is in the Olympics as of last Summer Olympics. So basketball is spreading pretty quickly. One of the most famous groups, if not the most famous group in the first 30 years, 35, 40 years of basketball, called the original Celtics. Now, obviously, at the time, they're not going to call them the original Celtics because they don't know there's a Celtics come after them. People just called them the Celtics or the New York Celtics sometimes because they're based in New York City. They're a famous early barnstorming professional team. By barnstorming, what we mean is teams would not really play home games per se. They travel all over the country to play games and make money from people coming out to see them. So, for instance, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, guys like that, they would barnstorm in the offseason of baseball. They'd go around all these different towns. People would flock to see them, and they can make money that way. During the 1920s, they were super popular. So they're not in Boston, right? They're based out of New York City, but they travel all around. They have no relation to the current Boston Celtics. The current Boston Celtics basically stole their name from them. But these guys became really popular. If you notice the picture, so here are the original Celtics. Notice they're wearing knee pads. Okay. Basketball is a pretty physical game at this point. The original Celtics start to kind of speed it up, start to introduce the fast break. But it's still pretty rough. Oh, I don't want it to cut off my feed. I'm still here. Yep. Stay in the call. All right, good. Somehow I always forget when that's going to happen. Again, it looks a lot different than it does today. For instance, like I already said, it's a lot rougher, so you're going to wear knee pads. After every single basket that's made, there's going to be a jump ball. Okay. It's not automatically once a basket's made, the other team gets the ball. No, there's a jump ball after every basket. There's no shot clock. Okay. A lot of things are different. And they're even called cagers. If you look at some old newspapers, you read some old books, and they talk about basketball players, you may see the term being used, cagers. You're like, what the heck are they talking about? Cagers. Cagers actually refer to basketball players because often they played in a cage. Like, it's not a joke. I don't remember what auditorium or what venue this is being played in, but if you look really closely at this, there is a cage around the floor. Now, this is one, I believe this is just a net being hung. I can't be positive of that, but there are a lot of instances where actually it's a physical iron cage around the court. I think most of that's to prevent the ball from going every which way if it goes off the court. But there's almost an element of like MMA in early basketball. They're in a cage, they're wearing knee pads, they're kind of roughing around. So it was less rough than football because Naismith was told to make a game less rough than football, but it could still be a little bit more contact heavy than today's basketball. So, despite the fact that the basketball is becoming really popular, pro basketball struggles to get a foothold here. It's very similar to the NFL in this respect. NFL is not popular for a long time. They don't make a lot of money for a long time. Basketball's the same way. High school and college basketball is where it's at. There are some semi-professional and professional leagues, but they kind of flit in and out of existence. They go bust pretty quick. It's not until the Basketball Association of America, which is the BAA, the National Basketball League, which is the NBL, they merged together in 1946 to form the National Basketball Association, the NBA, that we know today. That there's actually a really consistent major league in pro basketball. And still, even in the NBA, the first few years are really kind of touch and go. They're really not sure how long it's going to last, but obviously it stands the test of time. We'll get more into that later. But yes, high school and college ball are really where it's at. The first NCAA tournaments in 1939. It only invited 8 teams. The NCAA tournament originally you had to win your conference to go, so you could be a really good team, have one badly timed loss to a team in your conference, and you don't go to the NCAA tournament. Because of that, the NIT is more prestigious. If you know anything about basketball today, the NIT is the secondary level tournament from the NCAA tournament. If you don't make the NCAA tournament, you might make the NIT. And so, teams aren't maybe as motivated to go to the NIT now as certainly they would have been back then. The NIT was huge. It was played in Madison Square Garden, which we're going to talk about in about a minute here. And NIT, first of all, stands for National Invitational Tournament. This was a big deal, bigger than the NCAA. Okay. At this time, you could still play in the NIT and the NCAA. Keep the tournament. Keep that in mind as we move forward. So we'll have some teams claiming national championships from before 1939. Okay. Some with some interesting records. For instance, Butler, which we're going to mention coming up, claims a national title. I think in 1926, they were like 7-5 or some ridiculously like okay record. But national championships don't start to become really important until after 1939. And even then, if you won the NIT, you're probably considered a better basketball team or more appreciated than the team that won the NCAA tournament. And for trivia, Oregon won the first NCAA tournament in 1939. Okay. The jump shot becomes popularized. So I'm going to show you some videos coming up. You might laugh at the video. It looks funny how they shot the ball, even the quote unquote jump shot. But originally, everybody took what's called set shots. Your feet are spread wide apart. You kind of push the ball at the basket and you don't jump. That changes in the late 30s with a guy. I'm gonna show you his picture coming up, so I'll talk more about it then. But you can see the game start to evolve. The jump shot comes around. Fast break. The ball is becoming easier to bounce. You can push it faster. You can go up and down the floor faster. The fast break becomes involved. Big men become more of a thing. We think of basketball as a tall sport. It wasn't necessarily like that in the early days. That changes in the 1930s and 40s, which I'll show you coming up. Massive new arenas are built. We talked about this for college football and baseball. Same with basketball. Madison Square Garden. So this is not the current Madison Square Garden. There have been 4 Madison Square Gardens. One built 1879, one built 1890. This one is built 1925. The current Madison Square Garden is built 1968. But the 1925 Madison Square Garden becomes the hub, the quote-unquote Mecca, as you may have heard it called, the Mecca of basketball, the Mecca of college basketball, really. The New York Knicks do play there from the 1946 on in the NBA. The New York Rangers, the hockey team, plays there. But really, Madison Square Garden becomes a showcase for college basketball. They'd have a lot of double headers of college games that would completely sell out, whereas the Knicks would not sell out. This is the hub of college basketball. The Palestra in Philadelphia. I'm blanking on the date that was built. It was between 1925 and 1928. The Palestra, if you first of all, if you've never been to Palestra, do yourself a favor and go. Um, it's often called the cathedral of college basketball. It was built when Penn was still a power, and it's still kind of worship. I don't know if worship's the right word. Venerated to this day. This was a huge arena back in the day. You might not think it's huge in the pictures I'm going to show you coming up, but it was huge back then. And then Butler Fieldhouse. If you guys maybe follow Butler basketball, you might know that 2010, 2011, they made the championship game of the NCAA tournament, even though they were a small school. But Butler has had a long history of basketball. Some of you may know that Indiana is a basketball crazy state. That's one of the examples where basketball is not always a city sport. So often it's primarily a city sport, but it can also be popular in the country. And that's certainly true for Indiana. People loved basketball in Indiana. They built Butler Fieldhouse, which is absolutely massive. It's now known as Hinkle Fieldhouse. And if you've seen the movie Hoosiers, that's where the last game is filmed. I also happen to be there this summer, and I'm going to get into that in a second. But here's the Palestra when it's built. Okay, this is in Philadelphia. Here's the Palestra today. Again, I cannot recommend enough. If you are a college basketball fan, if you're a basketball fan of any kind, do yourself a favor. Go to a game at the Palestra. Doesn't matter what game. Could be any game. You will thank me later. Okay, this is a terrific venue for watching college sports. Here at the bottom is Butler Fieldhouse, again, renamed Hinkle Fieldhouse, I believe in the 70s after their legendary coach Tony Hinkle. This looks like an airport hangar, an aircraft hangar, right? I mean, this is massive. It's modeled on the Palestra. See how it's built the same? It's got that vault ceiling. I'm a big fan of the windows let in natural light. Fog Allen Fieldhouse, which I went by a month ago in Kansas, has the same thing. But Hinkle Fieldhouse is really incredible. Notice how the orientation of the floor has changed, right? The floor on this one, I think you can see me actually doing this. The floor goes kind of horizontal to the windows where originally it went straight onto the windows. They changed that because the sun was getting in players' eyes when they're trying to shoot it. So they flipped the court. So that's why it looks a little weird today. But the picture at the bottom right is actually a picture I took when I went there. I was in Indianapolis about a month ago, right after Kansas. And Hinkle Fieldhouse is cool. You can just walk in. You can just walk in, walk around, take a picture. Butler's head coach, Thad Matta, was just sitting across there. You can't see it from here, but he's sitting down right there. You can just go up and talk to him. So Hinkle Fieldhouse is really, really cool. If you're ever in Indianapolis, please check it out. Really cool. Huge stadium. Again, Butler's a small school. This is a massive indoor basketball arena, especially for back then. Basketball, maybe more than, I shouldn't say more than any other sport. More so than baseball and football, I will say. Basketball has had big time issues with gambling, right up there with horse racing and boxing. Boxing might be number one of sports that have issues with gambling. Basketball's right behind it. Okay, and there's several reasons for that. We're going to get into it. And I may be missing some here, so forgive me if I am. But one, basketball is a city sport. And what happens in the cities? There's money in the cities. There's gamblers in the cities. There's the mob in the cities. Okay? So it has real close proximity to all these dangerous elements. You have college games. College games are the most popular games in town, right? The NBA is not, even when it forms in 1946, NBA is not a big deal for at least another 25 years. Okay. College sports is where it's at. And these college students playing the game, some of them might not have much money, right? Okay. Now, some of the best players, remember we talked about the scandals involved where they'd get a job, a no-show job to go play for the team. They'll get money for going to play for the team. Sometimes, yes, that would happen, even though there weren't technically athletic scholarships until 1957. Sometimes they would get money to go there. But oftentimes it wasn't big. And if you weren't one of the best players, you probably weren't getting that much money, if any money, to go to the school. Okay. So and a lot of times the kids who go there are not the wealthiest kids in the world. They're kids from the city, maybe the inner city, maybe it's from poverty. Okay. So these kids don't have much money, right? So if a guy from the mob comes over to a kid and says, hey, listen, we'll offer you $500 to lose this game, you might be willing to listen if you really need that money. Okay. And so it wasn't always as obvious as that. It wasn't just, hey, lose the game on purpose. That's what makes this so kind of tricky. It wasn't about losing on purpose per se. It was about point shaving. So what is point shaving? Point shaving essentially means there are point spreads when you gamble for games, right? The point spread's not invented until the 1940s, actually. But the point spread essentially says, okay, let's say I have Temple University basketball team here. I have Villanova University basketball team here. If I'm a bookie, a guy who wants people to bet on this game so I can make money, I'm not going to just give them both as even favorites if Villanova is really a better team. Because then everybody's just going to bet on Villanova to win. And when they win, I'm going to lose all my money having to pay out their bets. So with point spreads coming in the 40s, they say, hey, listen, Villanova, we're going to make them an 18-point favorite. So Temple only has to lose by 17 in order to, quote unquote, win the bet. Right? So now both sides, no matter what side wins in that case, no matter what side covers the spread, that bookie's going to make his money back. He's not going to go broke. Right? So the invention of point spreads opens gambling up to a new frontier. Okay. Originally, before the point spread, just, yeah, you have to lose this game. Like the Black Sox in the 1919 World Series, right? They were intentionally losing the entire game. Point spreads, all you have to do is just not cover the spread. All you have to do if you're Villanova here, and I'm a gambler trying to convince this Villanova player to throw the game, just win the game by 16. You don't have to lose. You can still win the game. You can still be competitive. Right? Let your competitive nature out. Just don't win by 18 or more. And so that makes it a lot easier to throw games, okay? Especially in basketball, right? It's hard to make a shot in basketball. It's hard to play well sometimes, okay? The best shooters on earth will sometimes only make 40% of long distance shots. So if you're intentionally missing shots in a basketball game to keep the score down, it's not as obvious to somebody watching. If you turn the ball over, just throw it into a crowd, okay, maybe you just made a bad pass. That happens. It's harder to pick up on when somebody's intentionally throwing a game in basketball. And with point spreads, it makes it so much easier. And basketball had a real big problem with this. Maybe the most famous one is the 1950 City College of New York scandal, which also included other colleges. It's really interesting. If you go to the next slide, I just read this book actually about July, 5 or 6 months ago. Really, really good book. It's an in-depth look at that gambling scandal. CCNY was interesting in that it's the City College of New York. It doesn't charge tuition, okay? And it charges low tuition. I can't remember. But it was unusual in that it had black players. They had Jewish players, okay? The Jewish community becomes very attached to the game of basketball, partially because most of the Jewish community lives in cities, and basketball is a city game. But CCNY had no business being good back in this time, okay? Again, it's a commuter school. It's for poor kids, right? It's for minorities. In this time, they have no chance of being good usually. But they somehow get a lot of good players. They win the NIT championship and they win the national championship, the NCAA tournament championship in the same year, which does not happen. There's an investigation that finds out actually some of their guys point shaved earlier in the year. Some guys from other schools point shaved earlier in the year, and becomes a massive scandal. Okay. And NCAA cracks down on that. The FBI really gets involved. I mean, this is a big deal. Still happens later, though. In 1979, Boston College has the same thing. Their players are shaving points for the mob, right? Somebody from the mob gets in their ear, hey, we'll give you $1,000, but you better not cover the spread. And if you guys have seen The Godfather or Goodfellas or any movie like that, if the mob tells you to do something, the mob and the mafia being basically the same thing, you're probably going to do it. They're going to intimidate you to do it, right? So they feel like they have to throw this game. They have to shave points. They can still win the game, and they might need the money from it. But even if they feel like it's wrong to do it, even if they feel like their integrity is being lessened, sometimes they're intimidated so much by these mafia figures, they just feel like they have to do it. And this is a real problem for basketball over the years, especially in its early days. So I thought it would be a good idea to look at gambling because we haven't talked much about gambling in sports outside the Black Sox scandal. Basketball is a really good lens to view that through. That a lot of reasons why sports are popular is because of gambling. If you're a guy who you kind of like basketball, but you don't know anything about CCNY, you're not going to care about their game in 1950 unless you have money riding on it. Unless you say, hey, if CCNY wins by 12 points, I win $100. Now all of a sudden you care, right? So gambling does push it does kind of catalyze sports popularity. It helps it get more popular. And that's something we have to, consider. Sports popularity isn't always driven by the most moral of causes. So actually, after 1950, CCNY almost blows up their athletic program. Their basketball now plays Division III. They're not at the top level. There's a lot of fallout from that. But if you are interested in learning more about this, I would recommend this book. It's pretty accessible. It's not too long. I think it's under 400 pages. Um, give it a chance. Just like the league about the NBA, the NFL book um, that I recommended earlier. So, basketball entering the 1950s, which is where we're going to get after this. I'm going to introduce you to the post World War II sports landscape. So I'm not going to go past the late 1940s here, early 1950s. But basketball enters the 1950s. It's clearly behind baseball, boxing, college football, and probably horse racing in the pecking order, if you will, of sports popularity. In fact, I was at the Kentucky Derby Museum in Churchill Downs, Louisville, a few weeks ago. Again, on the same trip that I'm talking about, the Hinkle Fieldhouse. I'm talking about Fog Allen Fieldhouse. And there's a factoid at the Derby Museum that said, I want to get this right. By 1952, horse racing surpassed baseball as America's leading spectator sport. You wouldn't think of horse racing that late being so popular, but it was. More people went to watch horse racing than any other sport into the 1950s. So basketball is behind these sports in terms of popularity. I'm not saying that nobody cares about it, but it's definitely behind them in popularity. Okay. But it's going to grow. It's definitely going to grow. Like this guy on the right you see here, Bob Curlin, 7 foot tall. It's going to grow. We're going to talk about that in the future. So I picked these pictures for a reason. I have several pictures coming up. I also have a short video to show you. Top left, that guy, you probably have never heard of him before. His name's Hank Losetti. He popularizes the jump shot. It's not just him. There are other players too, but he's usually the name given as the guy who popularizes the jump shot, where we get away from just shooting the ball, pushing it towards the basket, legs spread out, no jumping. What Hank Losetti does is he actually does if you guys know what a floater is in basketball, he's essentially shooting a floater, but making it, a regular jump shot. Okay, he's shooting a floater from 25 feet. He kind of takes one step and pushes the ball at the basket, but he's still jumping. It's changing the game, him jumping and shooting the ball. And this made Hank Losetti just an absolute stud at Stanford. He didn't play professional basketball. He kind of turned down the NBA because the NBA wasn't a big deal at that point. But he's part of the revolutionizing of basketball. In addition to these other two guys, you may have heard of George Mikan. This is George Mikan. If you're aware of the Mikan drill, that is named after George Mikan. He was a 6'10" center at a DePaul University in the 1940s, and he goes to the Minneapolis Lakers. That's where the Los Angeles Lakers were first. Minneapolis, okay, and becomes an absolute superstar. He's like potentially, arguably, the first big man superstar in basketball. Teams just didn't know how to handle him. 6'10" back then is the equivalent of like a 7'2" guy today. You just didn't have guys that big. And he was dominant. And that's where the Lakers get a lot of their titles from their Minneapolis days because of George Mikan. If you ever thought it was strange that a team in Los Angeles is called the Lakers because there really isn't much water out there or lakes, because they started in Minneapolis, the land of 10,000 lakes, Minnesota. But George Mikan really does revolutionize the game, as well as Bob Curlin here. I'm almost positive you've never heard of Bob Curlin. He plays for Oklahoma A&M, which is now known as Oklahoma State. He also doesn't play in the NBA. He turns them down because they're not a big deal at that point. But he's really like the first 7-footer to become a huge deal. And he actually creates the rule against goaltending. So goaltending is where if a guy shoots a ball to basket and the ball's already coming down towards the basket and you swat it away, well, that counts as 2 points because the ball's already coming down towards the basket. Bob Curlin, all 7 foot of him, would just jump up and grab the ball when it was coming down towards the basket all the time. And the powers that be said, listen, we can't have this. You got to give the guys a chance to score, these little 5'10" guys. So you can't do that. So Bob Curlin's the reason we have a goaltending rule. And these three guys are arguably most likely people you've never heard of, but arguably some of the most important players in a transitioning basketball into what it is today. A name I forgot to mention If we go back to CCNY's head coach in this year, well, I can't zoom in on this. Their head coach is a guy named Nat Holman. Nat Holman was the star point guard of the original Celtics. So Nat Holman, if I go back, I think this is Nat Holman here, arguably the first basketball star in the 1920s. So he might be the first star. He goes on to coach CCNY and get caught up in that scandal, although he gets out kind of clean from it. He does not come across as a great character in this book. But these three guys really do a lot to start to revolutionize the sport. I do want to show you a clip, and hopefully this will play on YouTube all right. And if it doesn't, you can see kind of what to search to find this on YouTube. Here's a minute and 14 seconds of basketball in 1939. So just notice how different some of the things are. The offense is actually pretty interesting to watch. They run offense a lot differently, but you might chuckle at how they shoot the ball. And just because there's no shot clock at this time does not mean teams play slow. Teams actually probably play too fast at this point. They just run up and down the floor and chuck shots up. I mean, they shoot. If I were a coach today coaching these guys, I would say 90% of the shots they shoot, I'd say that's a bad shot. Why are you shooting that? Okay, but that's just how the game was played at this time. If you go back in time and look at shooting percentages of some guys we consider all-time greats, like a guy I'm going to have coming up here, Bob Cousy in the middle, their shooting percentage is awful because they throw up a lot of bad shots. Shots we would consider bad today. But let's look at a minute 15. So this is a doubleheader game in Madison Square Garden. CCNY actually plays in the first game. They're the Beavers team that's referred to. I think they play Oregon in the first game here, and Oregon wins the national championship after this. And then the second game is Northwestern versus St. John's. St. John's is a New York City college. They played a lot of games and still play a lot of games at Madison Square Garden. So let's watch.
New York, Madison Square Garden, a City College quintet, faces five fast and fancy web from the University of Oregon. It's the opening contest.
Just watch some of these shots they take. Remember, they're jump shots. Well, that's a set shot right there. He did not jump. There's no three-point shot at this time, remember, either. No three-point shot. There's that kind of running jump shot I told you about. It looks goofy, but they can make it.
In the second game, a team of Northwestern Wildcats is matched against St. John's University of Brooklyn. The lads from Illinois are off to a springboard start.
Bad shot. Still goes.
Take the lead. Cyber warfare comes to the gymnasium as the St. John's Indians retaliate with 2 points. But now on, the game is touch and go, with 10 men helping to get it there. A beautiful display of teamwork, and Northwestern gets in number column with sharp shooting. Bob Coble doing the honors.
Lots of hook shots.
But the Brooklyn boys are by no means in the basement.
This is a terrible shot coming up, by the way.
49 to 41.
Oh, wait, no, not this one.
Saints won to wind it up.
It must have been another game another video I was watching. Yeah, so that's a little flavor of 1939 basketball. Oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. Wait, no, I got to hit escape here. There we go. Let's go back. So you may know John Wooden. He's maybe the most famous basketball coach of all time for UCLA here, right? This is him with Lou Alcindor, later known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I believe he won 11 national titles at UCLA. But a lot of people don't realize this dude was a stud basketball player too. Here's John Wooden in college at Purdue. Correct. I might be wrong in these years. So I apologize if I get the years wrong. But I want to say he was the National Player of the Year 2 years in a row. I want to say 1929, 1930. Somewhere right around there. Late 20s, early 30s. National Player of the Year 2 times in a row. Okay, I mean, you can actually see this guy's pretty ripped for back in the 20s and 30s. So we know him today as this famous coach with Wooden's pyramid of success. And, you know, he taught his players how to put their socks on. We think of this guy as Wooden. But don't forget, Wooden was one of the most famous college basketball players in these early days of college basketball. I mean, just look at the calves on this guy. Yeah, so don't forget that Wooden was a terrific basketball player in his own right. Purdue is a university in Indiana. Okay, so again, Indiana really latches on the basketball pretty quickly. And then here are some, I think this might be the last slide. Yeah. Some guys who also changed the game or are legends of the game into the 40s and 1950s. Some of these guys even to the 60s and 70s, but I'm not going to get that far. On the far left here, you have Wilt Chamberlain. You probably have heard his name. You probably know him as a professional. I wanted to get a picture of him here as a Kansas Jayhawk. This is him in Fog Allen Fieldhouse with those beautiful windows that let in natural light. Wilt Chamberlain's from Philadelphia. I know my grandfather had friends who played against him in high school basketball, and the guy's just unguardable. Wilt Chamberlain was 7'1". He was extremely coordinated. He was a very good runner. He's actually very good at track and field. Could run, could throw the javelin. I mean, a terrific athlete. And 7'1" at that time is, again, like a 7'4" guy out there today. It's just unguardable. And I would also recommend you watching Wilt Chamberlain highlight videos. You know, not all his plays are dunks. I mean, this guy's making some pretty impressive shots from away from the basket. But Wilt Chamberlain's another guy who's in that big man revolution who just completely changes the game and really dominates it. Bill Russell and the Celtics is the only guy who can hang with him. He scores 100 points in an NBA game. I also brought Wilt Chamberlain up to kind of explain that the NBA in its early years had a real problem with keeping talent in the sport. They had a real problem with keeping, more than one team being hoarding all the talent. So kind of similar to baseball, how baseball had the reserve clause. Basketball says, hey, we don't want one team stacking up with all the best players. So what they have is a territorial draft pick. So for instance, Will Chamberlain, he's from Philadelphia. Even though he played at Kansas, he's considered to be a Philadelphia pick. So the Philadelphia Warriors at that time, who become the Golden State Warriors, the Philadelphia Warriors have the right to pick Wilt Chamberlain with their territorial draft pick before the real draft starts. And of course they do because he's awesome. He's not the only guy that's territorial draft pick, but I just want to bring it up to show you that the NBA is really concerned about having, balance in their teams. And they want to give these teams a chance to sign players that are local to their team, local to their town, their city, because then that'll make people show up to watch them, right? They're really concerned they're not going to get enough fans to show up if the team's bad and there are no local players. So say, hey, let's give the Philadelphia Warriors a chance at Wilt Chamberlain. We know people in Philly are going to come out to see their hometown boy, Wilt Chamberlain. I believe the territorial draft pick ends in the 60s at some point. The NBA is pretty well established by that point. But the second guy there is Bob Cousy, who's actually still alive. Pretty old. I think how old's Bob Cousy? Got to be around 90. He played basketball at Holy Cross, who actually wins an NCAA tournament, I believe, in 1952 or 1953. Another school that's no longer a basketball power, but it is a school from Western Massachusetts, from near where basketball is invented. He's really a maestro with dribbling the basketball. He kind of patents a new type of fast break. It's not like teams didn't fast break before, but he kind of perfects it with the Celtics. If you actually want to see Bob Cousy play, there's plenty of videos of him on YouTube, kind of just dribbling all over the court. Again, the shooting percentage is terrible because the players and teams back then just ran up and down the floor and jacked up shots. But he is an interesting guy to watch. He's also has a really interesting appearance in the movie Blue Chips. Have you ever seen the movie Blue Chips? He plays an old athletic director. And there's a scene in the movie where he's talking to his coach. And it's not even in the script, but he's just shooting free throws. And he makes like 14 in a row. He's just sitting there talking to the coach, shooting free throws. And he's like 75 years old in this movie. Maybe not quite that old. He's at least 65 years old in this movie. And he's just popping free throws continuously while talking to him. It's a great scene. And then on the right here, this guy's named Marcus Haynes. You probably have not heard of him, but he was part of the Harlem Globetrotters, which are still around today. We're going to talk about racism and race in sports in, I think, not next lecture, but the next one. But the Globetrotters form really is because a lot of black players aren't allowed to play on white teams. And the Globetrotters become showmen. They play basketball a different way, right? They think they can get fans to come see them if they do outrageous acts, right? If they do crazy dribbling maneuvers and crazy shooting maneuvers and kind of play around with the other team. Oftentimes the Washington Generals is the other team. They pay them to come there and lose to the Globetrotters. They essentially pay them to lose. Hey, we're going to come embarrass you and humiliate you, but we'll give you some money for doing it. And Marcus Haynes is maybe the best ball handler of all time, even from back in the 1940s. So I took a picture of him here, kind of kneeling down, dribbling around this guy. The Globetrotters were an absolute spectacle at the time. They're still around today. You can still watch them. Wilt Chamberlain played a year in the Globetrotters because he left Kansas a year early and the NBA wouldn't let him in. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks too. Bob Gibson, if you're aware of him, on the St. Louis Cardinals, the pitcher, he played for the Globetrotters for a little bit. So I wanted to show you a kind of a different flavor of basketball that was happening concurrently at the same time with all these other things, but had a little bit different, a little bit of a different feel to it, a little bit of a different flavor, where these guys were just clearly just trying to entertain. It wasn't really about the competitive nature of it. It was about entertainment. It was about making money that way. Okay. So that's all I have for us here on basketball. I would be happy to answer any questions you guys have about that moving forward. If you want to just email me or during the time when we talk about your final paper, you can bring it up. No assignment for the basketball one. You guys get the week off of assignments. Take the week off. We'll get them back after this. Okay. But hopefully you learned something from that. Again, like I said, I kind of learned some things from that or just remembered things I had forgotten. Like, for instance, Hank Luzetti. I knew a guy named Hank started the jump shot. I couldn't think of his last name. And then thankfully Google helped me out with that. Make sure you have all your assignments in by Friday for sure when those progress reports go out. I'm definitely going to grade the college football primary sources by then. I'm going to try to grade the ones you're submitting by tonight, the sport and wartime primary sources analysis. Remember to get those in by tonight. I think 2 guys are still waiting on them for that. I'm going to try to grade it definitely at least the college football ones by the Friday marking period end. Also, please look on my prep. I put comments on your primary source analysis to try to get you to be better at it the next time. I usually write a pretty healthy paragraph for that. So please take the chance to look at that. If you do the discussions how I ask you to, if you put a post and then you reply to somebody else and it is thoughtful, you're not just kind of throwing words out there and hoping that sticks, you're going to get 100 for that. Just follow the directions. You basically get 100 for that. Your discussions have been solid so far. I'd like to see a little bit more disagreement because I know you guys don't all agree with each other on everything. Don't be afraid to disagree, as long as you're making a good argument to back it up. But overall, again, you guys are doing pretty much how I hoped you do to start. Okay, so I'm gonna end this video now. It actually went longer than I thought it would. So I'm gonna upload this to YouTube. Then we'll be back next week with Unit 3, starting that post-industrial sports. That's after World War II, after the Industrial Revolution translates into something else. We're going to talk about that coming up. All right. So hope you learned something today, and I'll see you again soon. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Or now.